Certainly had a lot to say about it during the show this week, and we bring in Mike right now for a little show crossover here. Mike, good morning to you.
Michael, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for hopping on. And I know rarely do you dive into the high school sports talk on the Sports Bash, but this is a big story. I mean, people see 52-3, and they want to go bananas. They want to go bonkers. I mean, maybe a different story if you were there. And I wanted to ask you as well. I mean, you're a longtime youth baseball coach. Sometimes in baseball, I mean, there's no clock. There's not a ton you can really do other than making intentional outs, but would that have been a better way to go, in your opinion, in this situation?
Well, you're right. I mean, this baseball's tough. There is no clock, and as Phil Anastasia, the longtime Inquirer writer, came on, and he made that point yesterday in that when you're in a situation like this, you are in need of the team that is the lesser team in this instance to make outs to end the game. They become their own clock, and that's where it's hard. Where, look, the first reaction was, Mike Gill, what do you think? The score is 52-3. Somebody tagged me on Facebook, unbeknownst to me. I didn't even know who it was. Almost appalled that I didn't comment on it during my show, and I said I didn't know about it. Number one. Number two, my first reaction, Mike, was I wasn't at the game. And I think you have to be there to really see in what manner was Buena consistently scoring. Now, what I was read and told, now this came from a tweet from a Buena player. So, I mean, that's a high school kid who's on the Buena team. He tweeted that they got walked over 30 times in the game. Think about that. That's over 30 free base runners. Not to mention the box score in the press, which I don't know why the press printed the score, but it was in the paper, had them having 10 errors. That's another 10 free base runners. That's over 40 kids on base by nothing they did. Now you could say, why are they walking? Swing. You're making a mockery of the game. You're making a mockery of the other team if you're swinging at pitches that are that far out of the strike zone. Now I talked to an umpire and asked, not the umpire of that game, but an umpire, and said, how do you allow 30 walks? Like, what he said, those pitches had to be so far out of the zone that the umpire would be humiliated to call them strikes. So that's kind of what you're dealing with in this situation. It's not easy. Phil said yesterday there was a time where he was covering a game and the coach instructed his team, do not swing at anything for 4 innings. And he said it looked awful, that the kids are up there taking strikes, taking walks. It's a mockery. So it's either that way embarrassing or 52-3 embarrassing. Which is worse? I don't know.
I think it's less of the question, was something out of line here. I think by all accounts, in terms of hearing comments, reading about comments from both coaches, players on both sides, I don't think it was, an angry situation. It was unfortunate is the better word, but I don't think anything was done out of line in terms of how that game was played. Yes, the score was very lopsided, but both, Buena was very respectful in the win, and, in reading quotes from the Pleasantville coach, I don't think he really had a problem with it, But, so I guess the bigger question is, what needs to be done to prevent this from happening again? I mean, do the high school baseball rules in the state need to change? I know softball has a rule where if one team gets up by 15, no matter how many innings have been played, that game is over. Now, baseball, you'd usually have to play 5 innings. That's the mercy rule. I mean, are we going that direction just based on this one game?
Well, I know depending on what levels you play, as you mentioned softball, there are certain tournaments that I've been a part of that they have, if you're up by so many runs after 10, so many runs after 4, so many runs after 5. So if the game early on gets out of hand, I think it's like 15 runs after 3, 12 after 4, 10 after 5. They have a kind of a sliding scale that if you could see that this game's getting out of hand really early, we'll end it early. So that's one possibility. The second one, a question that I've gotten a lot, which comes around in football a lot. Why is Buena playing Pleasantville in baseball? Is obviously one question. Buena, the State 2 champion, a powerhouse in baseball right now. Pleasantville struggling in baseball. Well, their enrollment is almost identical. The research that I did in 2013, they're 24 students apart. 584 for Buena, 560 for Pleasantville. Same group, same size, but not the same purpose on the baseball field. And a lot of people will say, well, that's too bad. Could the Cape Atlantic League take into account some of these things and redo schedules. Say, look, that's not put Buena and Pleasantville on the schedule together. That's not going to be a competitive matchup. But, that's not something that a lot of people want to take the time to do. We saw it in football a couple of years ago. Why was Lower Cape May on Holy Spirit's schedule? And it ended up in a forfeit. So these things maybe could be prevented ahead of time if people kind of come together and say, look, we know this game's not going to be – now they're going to play again. They play twice because they're in the same division, which is not good for – no, I was just saying the fact that they're going to play twice now because they're in the national, conference together.
Right. And not only that, they're going to play Bridgeton too, which, no disrespect to Bridgeton, but probably on a similar skill level than Pleasantville.
Oh, yeah, and I think they were 1-23 last year, and talking to their coach last year, he said, look, we just have kids that just aren't ready. And that's another question. Should these teams be playing varsities? Can they have noticed ahead of time and said, look, we need to play a JV schedule? As I said to somebody asked me, why is Buena playing Pleasantville? Well, Buena has to play somebody, and Pleasantville has to play somebody. You can't just put all – because, quite frankly, there's more haves in the baseball world than there is have-nots. And there's a lot of very good baseball competition in this area, but they also have a problem in the Cape Atlantic League, as they do in football, with a wide range of sizes of schools. And size doesn't always mean success. You have a team like Buena with less than 600 students is probably better than baseball than teams like Vineland and Atlantic City and some of the bigger EHTs and Absagamis that have over 1,500 students. So it's hard to figure out where to fit everybody.
It really is. And you look at sports across the board, and this is where it gets tough, Mike. I mean, baseball, yes, there's a huge gap in talent between Buena and Pleasantville, but most sports, it's pretty close. I mean, I think back to a boys' soccer game I was at, a playoff game between these schools. It was maybe the game of the year. I think Pleasantville won 4-3. I mean, very tightly contested. And, certainly we're not raining down on Pleasantville here. There's a ton of sports where Pleasantville has the upper hand over Buena. Boys' basketball jumps out. Maybe track and field jumps out. So does it become tough for the Cape Atlantic League to micromanage by the sport? And if there really becomes a discrepancy in one specific sport, do you need to change the layout of the league just based on that sport?
Well, that's a great point. And a lot of people have said, well, they should, because quite frankly, on the girls' side, this didn't get a lot of attention either, but Buena beat Pleasantville 20-0 in softball. 20-0 sounds drastically better than 52-3. But Pleasantville lost 22-0 in baseball a couple days earlier to Cedar Creek, which is also a small Group 2 school. So you're right. I mean, do you micromanage for every single sport and say, well, in this sport, you're going to be in the American, and in that sport, you're going to be in the national? Because, that's admittedly probably pretty difficult to do. So without basically wanting to micromanage your talent, which a lot of times people aren't going to be truthful. That's another problem. Hey, are you guys going to be good? Where are you going to be? We're not going to be that good. And you're kind of sandbagging so that you can go down and beat up on some of the lesser teams. And, here's all these good teams beating up on each other because the coaches were truthful. So I don't know that that's the perfect way to do it, but unfortunately you have a situation here that's not good for anybody. But I don't think a lot of people are angry at Buena, calling them classless. I don't think that's fair at all. And a lot of people on the other side are saying, well, tell Pleasantville to get better and suck it up. And I mean, that's just a 1980s mentality that is no longer around.
Yeah, you're right. Appreciate the insight, Mike. I know you spent some time on this during your show on the Sports Bash this week, and certainly a topic that, needed a little more attention on our show this morning. Appreciate you hopping in. And like we've talked about, I think in terms of the people that were there, in terms of both coaches, players on both sides, yes, it's unfortunate. People really shouldn't be angry in terms of the social media world. I mean, the game was played with class from all accounts. It's just a situation where how do we prevent this from happening in the future? So I think we've hashed it out pretty good here, Mike. And, again, appreciate the time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, just a note, Buena pulled all its players after the first inning.
Right.
They went station to station. They weren't stealing bases. They weren't trying to score runs. They were doing things the way that you do things in that kind of situation. So just to put that out there.
All right, thanks again. Thanks, Mike Gill, appreciate the time. Check him out, obviously, Monday through Friday on the Sports Bash. We'll take another break here on the South Jersey Sports Report.